There's a study 10 years in the making, and it is shedding light on the impacts of grazing on greater sage grouse populations, which includes a number of benefits, from building robust habitat to reducing wildfires. Kaitlynn Glover with the Public Lands Council and NCBA joins us now for an update. Kaitlynn, good morning. Thank you for being here. A little background on the study. I understand this is a big win. It's something that you guys have been waiting for, but tell us about how this came about.
So, Suzanne, for a long time, right, we're probably talking about 20 years or more, there's been this false narrative that grazing across the West has somehow had a negative impact on greater sage grouse populations. What we have seen time and time again over generations is that grazing activity on the landscape has sustained sage grouse populations, has made them more resilient, has made landscapes healthier, but we needed the science to prove it. So a decade ago, the Public Lands Council, the University of Idaho, and a number of other partners designed this study, started this work to have a longitudinal study over that decade-long span of how grazing impacts the landscape, what those landscape impacts mean for greater sage grouse nesting populations and chick recruitment and retention in the spring, and what that meant for the sustainability and the populations of the species west-wide. This work in the southern part of Idaho is the most robust work that we have seen so far. And it is definitive, Suzanne, that when we are looking at managing greater sage grouse populations, particularly among this Great Basin, we need cattle grazing. We need the management of those grasses for these chicks to survive. This is big news because it's peer-reviewed science, but it's also a bit of recognition of what our producers have known all along, that what is good for the herd is good for the bird, and vice versa.
You know, that sounds like a bumper sticker, Kaitlynn. I'm just going to go on record and say that. You know, speak to some of the anti-grazing myths, because they are out there, right? Now, this, of course, setting the record straight on that. But, you know, maybe you could also talk to the fact that cattle producers, they are the best stewards of their land.
That's exactly right. I mean, when we're talking about fine fuels management in order to prevent catastrophic wildfires and manage that wildfire mosaic, when we're talking about the kind of biodiversity of small insects that feed a number of ground-dwelling birds, including sage grouse chicks, when we're talking about the organic matter that cattle and sheep are able to integrate in the soil by the nature of the way they move through grazing rotations, every single one of these pieces is carefully managed stewardship by public lands grazing permittees, and in the same way that these folks manage their private ground as well. These are people who manage hundreds of millions of acres in the West and then across the country, not only for the benefit of their livestock, but also for the benefit of the wildlife, the ecosystem at whole. And what's going to be really important, especially as we sit here in mid-June, is the health of that ecosystem as we look ahead to the wildfire season. Grazing is the best land management tool for so many problems that we see facing these ecosystems in these communities. And so it's so encouraging that the science is confirming what we know to be true.
Absolutely. So at this point now that we have this study, we have the results, we know what works, how is this going to be used moving forward and implemented?
So the administration is going to need to go through a series of land management plans about how to manage these public lands for sage grouse interests and sage grouse populations. And so this science is going to be key as we work through that regulatory process. But it's all part of building this larger body of science where we are continuing year on year to amass the widespread values of these grazing activities, because every time we go through a land management plan, every time we work through a USDA conservation program, grazing management plan, every time we look at habitat for wildlife, we need this strong, current, relevant science. And so we at the Public Lands Council and all of our partners intend to use this as many places as we can, because it is so representative of this really unique but very large western ecosystem.
Yeah, just great information. Again, Kaitlynn, thank you for joining us. And congratulations to you and the industry. Of course, this is something, like you said, over a decade that you've been waiting for. Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and NCBA Natural Resources, Kaitlynn Glover, again.